By the way,
Yeah.
we don't know
scam.
how this ends in the Senate. These shameless Trumpsters will remain shameless Trumpsters. But we do know how the story ends. We do know how history writes this. We know that everyone who defends Donald Trump right now will be exposed. We know Mike Pence will be exposed for what he is. We know that Barr will be exposed for what he is. We know that all of these characters, Rudy Giuliani, will be exposed for what he is. The history, it will be bleak, and their families, their children,
That's what I never
their
understand.
grandchildren,
I don't get it either.
everyone who has their last name will carry that around with them if they decide to continue lying for a failed reality TV host who will show them no loyalty. Loyalty only goes one way with Donald Trump. And that's what I find so remarkable here, that all of these people who are going to be called out, I promise you, I say this to you as your buddy, you're going to be called out.
Joe,
You
3 days.
might as well do what Lev did and come clean. Mike Pence, history's going to record your deeds.
Maybe listen
Get
to your wife.
in front of them. No need to talk to Barr. He's corrupt to the core. But history, it almost, does anybody remember who voted for impeachment or who voted for articles of impeachment with Nixon? No. They remember the people, John Meacham, that stood on the side of right. They remember a senator from Tennessee who actually had the courage, even in the state of Tennessee, where you are right now, to say words that actually, he's dead. But those words continue to ring and will ring through history because they came from a partisan Republican who said, what did the president know and when did the president know it? Those words will be read in history books for 100 years, and Howard Baker will be remembered as a man of virtue because of it. What Republicans, what names will children and grandchildren be able to read of their fathers and mothers and take pride in that? I hope by the end of this sorry spectacle, we could say scores. Nothing would make me prouder of these people that I've known for years and worked with. But that really is a question, isn't it? Who are the Howard Bakers that history will remember as men and women of virtue?
That's the open, rolling, and at this point, dispiriting question, because there don't seem to be enough votes to. We're always talking. I find this kind of depressing. We say, "Oh, well, there are 4 who might want to hear witnesses." Wow, there are 4 United States senators who might want to actually hear what the facts are.
Yeah.
Out of 90, out of 51 or 52. Wow, that's great. We just sort of move the other 47 to a different category of condemning them with what George W. Bush used to call the bigotry of low expectations. We just don't think they're going to do it, so we're excited about 4. I agree with your analysis. What I sometimes say to folks who are in office and they listen politely and then or appear to listen politely and then move on is, what do you want us to think when we look at your portrait? And it's an appeal to vanity, honestly. It's not even an appeal to principle. It's an appeal to, do you want to be in this kind of conversation we're talking about? Do you want to be Margaret Chase Smith, who early on stood up and said that Joe McCarthy had gone too far? Or do you want to be Joe McCarthy? Do you want to be a machine hack who gets reelected, perhaps because that's your highest and best use, but who is never remembered? It seems to me it's a pretty clear and compelling choice. And I'm not saying that therefore there's an absolute vote on the verdict, that therefore, and I'm absolutely sure that this position is right. I'm not that, not that arrogant about this stuff. But I do know this, because they're not even willing to engage on the facts. If you can engage on the facts and you decide, you know what, it's not worth it, I don't mind having a president who does this. I find that unconscionable, but, you know, it's a democracy. You know, so other people can come to that conclusion. But at least listen to the facts, engage, and therefore be loyal to this fundamental idea we had, which was that we would think before we acted instead of acting and then maybe thinking.
Yeah, and
pretty straightforward.
The point you make, John, is very important, because this is not about a final vote on impeachment. People can disagree. Even if all the information comes out, there may be senators who say, you know what, this is shameful, I'd vote to censure him, but we're not going to overturn the results of an election over this. People could make that argument, and we could have a good faith debate over that. But when you have the head of the Senate Majority Leader, saying we're not going to have a fair trial, I'm going to coordinate this with Donald Trump, with the defendant, it's going to be a scam trial like they'd run in Moscow. And that's what Moscow Mitch, of course, would do. That's his default. And then you've got Lindsey Graham, who's actually the chairman of the Judiciary Committee for the United States Senate, a position that used to be held in high esteem, saying he wasn't interested in even hearing the facts. This, of course, just a few weeks after saying if there were a quid pro quo, then that would be troubling and he would be very concerned. Or you have Susan Collins yesterday. Again, just embarrassing herself. Again, not wanting a fair trial, not wanting to get information, to let Americans know the nature of their president, the nature of their presidency, and how it impacts America on the world stage. How it's impacting a democracy that has been invaded by Donald Trump's hero, Vladimir Putin. And I say Donald Trump's hero. If he's not his hero, please give me evidence of any time that Donald Trump has not kowtowed to him in person or when speaking of him. And so, yeah, this is not about, are you going to vote to impeach the president or not? This is simply about, are you going to vote to give America a fair trial? Are you going to vote for transparency? Are you going to vote to get the truth out? Are you going to rig the process? Are you so scared of the truth and what it will reveal of Donald Trump, this failed reality show host who will throw you overboard in a second? Are you so afraid of the truth that you won't even give Americans the fair trial that they are demanding?
Pretty heavy conversation. We still need to get Katty Kay and Jeremy Bash into it. There's a lot more to get to on this story. Lev Parnas didn't just link President Trump to the Ukraine scandal. He implicated the vice president as well. We'll show you that moment. Plus, what Parnas said about Devin Nunes that had the congressman responding on Fox News last night, trying to rejigger his story. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.